Hello everybody, beautiful island behind me, Ashes of Man, book 5 out of the Sun Eater series. Continued greatness, continued excellence. I do only give this a 4.25 out of 5 though, and there's several reasons for that. Clearly, this was a book that was meant to be combined with Kingdoms of Death. What made this book so this book was probably the most straightforward out of the last 4, and by straightforward I mean straightforward in its plot direction. Right? But what this book felt the most was 2 things. One, I enjoy slow moments. I'm someone actually that really enjoys the slow, more grindier moments if it means adding to the world building. But for me, the slow moments here were just adding to Hadrian's development without actually being development, if you get what I mean. What I mean by that is our character has suffered some emotional impact from the last book, and because of that, the slow moments here are meant to recover from that. But the moments are so grand and so severe that, again, I've repeated this before, but this book I felt the most Hadrian Marlowe fatigue in the Sun Eater universe. I think at this point the universe could have really benefited from having other POVs or having some other much more intense side characters with arcs. Because we're introduced to new characters, don't get me wrong, but there's a lack of arcs, and that's always going to be my complaint for what makes this series a masterpiece. And I hope that Ruocchio in future series will really put his mind to that, because I don't know, that for me that really suffered here. But there's a lot to love still. A lot to love. Let's start off with the world building, which to me was one of the more weaker elements of this series, of this book specifically, which I only gave 4.25 out of 5. Again, there are some revelations, and again the Imperium and these kinds of things, and I don't know, the ending of this book is tough. Don't get me wrong, with some things being telegraphed, but I wouldn't say that there's something more added than the rest of the books. So I don't really have too much more to say, and that will lead to me of prose and dialogue. I think compared to the previous book, this was just a tiny step down, but still the standard Christopher Ruocchio awesome prose and dialogue. And there's something about Ashes of Man that I did genuinely enjoy were those slow moments, right? That there are consequences to book 4. Oftentimes we've seen in sci-fi fantasy series there not being consequences, and I think clearly there are some grave consequences to Hadrian Marlowe here, and consequences not only to himself but to others. And that's the frustrating bit, I think, is that I wanted to see more of the consequences to others and the consequences of others affecting their relationship with Hadrian. Because oftentimes, because of the character that he is, people are giving him the benefit of the doubt. I say that reluctantly, but they're giving him, because of his powers, right, that benefit. And I would have liked to have seen more of the consequences because of a lack of Hadrian's, let's say, because of what happened to him before. He's already lost so much, but lose something because of that. You get what I'm trying to say? I don't know. I felt that was a bit disappointing in this book. But something I really enjoyed more was the Emperor in this book. And that really added, I guess I'm going more into characters. The Emperor's bit of character arc is enjoyable, and Alexander's, and I don't know, I think the character arc of the Imperium, I suppose. And yeah, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. The world, again, the world build, I'm kind of being disjointed a little bit, like Ashes of Man, but again, world building was pretty standard here, still very good. And that goes to plot, which was probably the strongest aspect, which I gave 4.5 out of 5. The plot, although slow, the last third I really enjoyed. You're getting more you're getting more of your standard, the outmaneuvering of the Ciel scene and the Prince against the Imperium here, and the power and dominance of the Imperium being put into question. I think that leads into emotional impact, which is very high. Although some things were a bit telegraphed, I think, there's definitely that relationship, that romantic relationship between Hadrian and Valka is probably the highlight of this book, and that they have that kind of deep internal understanding of each other. And I loved, actually, going back to plot, that we really saw Valka's perspective of book 4. That I really enjoyed. And something like that is something I wish was more from the side characters. Like, we saw more side character perspectives, not in novellas. I think that would have been beneficial. And that's why I'm only giving this 4.25 out of 5. But for emotional impact, there's definitely some big impacts here and some cool revelations from book 1. And that's something you have to give credit for the world building, is that all books, all characters have some type of relevance, right? Like a character, one of my favorite characters in book 1 ends up having some relevance here in book 5. And that was really cool to see. I was like, oh snap, that's awesome. That's super awesome. And you know that, like, for when you're noticing these kinds of things, or you have some attention to detail, those kinds of benefits are really beneficial. Like Game of Thrones, a great example. I'm trying to think of, like, Stormlight Archive, when a character you read in book 1 has relevance in book 4. Those kinds of things are also really cool to see, right? So here, present again. Prose dialogue, 4.5 out of 5. Characters, I gave 4 out of 5. Whoa, something just bit me. That was weird. That's what you get for being in the jungle. Character, I gave 4 out of 5. Again, it's that I love the Emperor in this book, Hadrian Marlowe's journey, but there's a piece of me that's a bit reluctant, right, with Hadrian Marlowe, is that it was so dark, especially with time. The time consequence for Hadrian, I don't know, like, and I get it. The way that the author plays with time in the series is one of my favorite, Interstellar kind of level. Like, for example, you have a plebeian who, if he signs up as a conscript, one of the sacrifices he's making is he knows he's never going to see his family again. And I would have loved to dive deeper into that. It's those kinds of elements that I really love, is that for plebeians and for palatines and like these kinds of things. I really enjoyed that. So we see more of that here. Very enjoyable book, a little bit disappointing, and I'm a little bit worried about the arc that we're going in. But it was a good soft reset. Still epic, still grandiose. Take my complaining with a grain of salt. This is still a very good series, still excellent series. And I'm excited to see where this goes. Shorter review than usual, but yeah, I think that about does it.